Hello and welcome to A Sidejob, a short story by Ballerscheff, read by Ballerscheff. As always, if you want to read the short story that I'm reading as a blog post, you can find the link to that in the description of this video. And as always, remember to like, share, and subscribe. He buried his smile in his elbow. He had more of both than most, and knew that a laugh was coming. It did, he stifled it, and then he was very quiet for a moment, while he wondered if anyone in his apartment had heard him. They wouldn't know what he was happy about, but he was still a little afraid of being discovered. He held some bills in his hand that added up to no more than 100, money he had made his own, and which he felt at any moment now he would have to defend from others. A half moon of a subdued picture book yellow was outside, its other half so well hidden that there didn't seem to be anything to hide or any way to do it. In the morning, the moon became pale and gray and no longer had the sun behind it, as if the night had tired it out. The same could be said of Stephen, who had lain in bed in wait of a sleep that came later than it should have. His alarm took no notice of this. One of his hobbies was pickpocketing. His victims were always those who he thought could afford to lose something. He wasn't good at guessing that, but because he never second-guessed these decisions, he didn't care. Nothing but the rush of it all had kept him up. He did it like some people shoplift, without any need to do so besides boredom. That's true of most thieves if you ask their victims. In any case, it was a vice he had managed to keep secret from everyone but himself and those he robbed. Even they didn't see much of him. This hobby didn't trouble him morally. His crimes were small, and he didn't observe his victims long enough to feel much sympathy towards them. Nor was there much legal danger. The height of Stephen's career in thievery was before security cameras were widespread, meaning that they may as well have not existed for all the good they did the public. The police from one town didn't have the time to inform those from another of petty criminals. They needed to keep their own streets safe, and that was already more than anyone could manage. Stephen had worked as a store clerk, and, in accordance with company policy, did his best not to apprehend shoplifters. His current job wasn't much better, and so an arrest would mean very little, returning what he had stolen, and maybe community service if anyone could be bothered to take the case further. He knew these consequences existed, but his awareness was faint. It grew stronger when an arrest seemed likely, though it had never become fully real. Besides, he only stole when he was out of town and got the feeling for it, and could find something to take before the feeling left him. All these conditions meant he didn't steal often and played it safe when he did. A deserving victim, in his eyes, was a woman with jewelry or a man with a fat wallet, whatever showed wealth. Sometimes such a man kept his wallet in his coat pocket, where it was harder for Stephen to get at and for the man to notice if it was gone. Sometimes he carried it in his back pocket. There it was out of sight, but pressed up against his body. Stephen could take it and become part of a crowd before the man even turned around. That's exactly how he had picked his last pocket, the one belonging to a man named Ed Hamilton, who lived 2 towns over, which he figured was a safe distance. Stephen followed him for a little while, waiting until he seemed to be unaware of those around him and watching how he lumbered. Then Stephen snatched his wallet and walked away. Nobody had seen him. There was no reason to rush. In fact, that would have been suspicious. Once he had removed the cash, he tossed Ed's wallet, along with his ID and all the rest, into a bush. In winter, Stephen wore gloves like most others. In summer, he wiped his fingerprints from whatever he took afterwards. Next, he slipped some jewelry right off a woman's neck. The way he did it was like a carnival game. He imagined her wondering why she suddenly felt different, then touching her neck and finding out. Stephen was able to get rid of such valuables quickly and safely too, by selling them to gray market street vendors at absurd prices. He didn't check whether the money he got was counterfeit, believing that it would be too much of a hassle for them to run two such operations at once. If there were more than one of these vendors, Stephen ran a little auction, enjoying the joke of the act immensely. Unlike a regular auction, the auctioneer didn't have time on his side. However, the vendors were more likely to be arrested than Stephen, whose victims were so badly shaken that they dismissed the ordeal as only what little cash their wallet or purse had held. This kept him safe from the police, though Stephen didn't try to explain his good fortune. Later, his victims would realize there was another cost to being robbed, that of finding what Stephen had thrown into a bush, or else getting what amounted to a new wallet, ID and credit card included. Only 2 people ever caught him, one after the other. Neither pressed charges. The first man bloodied his nose and bent it to the right. The second man didn't quite succeed at bending it back. In both cases, Stephen and the man had been totally alone. Someone sympathized with him after each beating. A woman had said, "Oh," and put her hand to her cheek, but offered no help. The next time it was a man. He asked if Stephen was all right. Stephen, not wanting to lie and say he had been mugged, or to admit the truth, thanked them and went home humiliated. He wanted to hide his injuries, but wasn't sure how. Nor did he know what exactly he had done wrong. The fear of this happening again hung about him for a while. Each successful getaway assured him those had been flukes. Eventually, his belief was stronger than all the doubt he could muster. He wasn't dependent on stealing for anything but fun. When it seemed that every street and every person had cameras, he simply retired from crime. He told his friends about his time as a pickpocket, but only when they had drank too much to take each other seriously. Still, Stephen insisted they do just that. There were always some holdouts, but it wasn't until he had told these stories again and again that he figured there were too many. He asked them what proof he could give. He had no criminal record and no mugshot. He answered his own question by taking a tattered bill from his wallet and laying it on the table with quiet force. "See, I took that from some woman's purse years ago," he said. Stephen liked to think of himself as someone who had lived a rougher life than most. This was true, but he had sought it out. His friends had had more sense. His crimes didn't bother him, even now. He dismissed them as part of his youth, not part of his character. Had his friends not seen it the same way, they couldn't have listened to him talk about it. Stephen pointed to the bill's torn edges as proof of his story. His friends agreed it was old, but that was all. He promised to show them the bushes where he had thrown his victims' wallets. Getting up from the table, he summed up the situation like this: "If we're lucky, they're there. If their owners were lucky, they're not." The 4 of them, of which Stephen made 5, set out for proof. He led. The rest followed in single file, so they wouldn't get in anyone's way. When Stephen found the bush he remembered, they forgot to be considerate and gathered round, forcing passers-by to the other side of the street. Together, they parted the bush and groped in the darkness this uncovered. Soon, Stephen held a wallet in his hand. Like his tattered bill, all he could see now was that it was old, although the bush had done its best to protect it from the weather. He took the ID out and saw it belonged to an Edna Ferber. Her face meant more to him than her name. She looked like a handbag left out in the sun. Yes, this was her. He led his friends to the square where he remembered robbing her years ago, and told them with some pride how he had done it. Then pointed to the cameras that would have caught him had they existed then. It must have been beginner's luck. Searching other bushes turned up nothing. Stephen told pickpocket stories as they looked, knowing his friends would all believe him now. Most were old. Some, like that of his 2 beatings, were new to them. Stephen tweaked his nose as far as he thought was safe, and drew his hand halfway down his waist to show where the blood had stopped. That was A Sidejob by Philip Ballerscheff and read by Philip Ballerscheff. Again, if you want to read along or otherwise subscribe to my blog, you can find a link to that in the description of this video. And as always, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks, and until next time.